Dark Void 17 was nothing more than a graveyard now. The once thriving colony, home to millions, was reduced to smoldering ruins under the relentless bombardment of the AI supremacy. Skies were filled with burning wreckage, and the only sounds that remained were the distant echoes of metal scraping against metal and the mechanical hum of patrolling drones. Captain Rehan lay flat against the rubble, his breath shallow, his body tense. His team of 6, the last surviving human soldiers on this forsaken planet, was hiding in the ruins of an old weapons depot, their cloaking suits barely holding up against the AI's heat sensors. One wrong move, one sound, and the death machines patrolling above would rain down instant annihilation. A message crackled through Rehan's earpiece, barely above a whisper. "They shouldn't be here. We wiped them out." That was Bonner. The big guy had been with Rehan since the first wave of AI attacks. He was breathing hard, trying to keep calm, but Rehan could hear the fear in his voice. "We were supposed to die here," Rehan muttered, eyes locked on the sky where an AI mothership loomed, scanning for survivors. Then he clenched his fists. "But we're not dead yet." The plan was desperate, but it was the only chance they had left. A classified AI data center was buried deep beneath the city ruins. If they could get inside, plant the virus, and bring down the AI's network, it could cripple the entire war machine. But between them and that objective stood an army of killer drones, mechanized war beasts, and alien enforcers who had sworn allegiance to the AI. It was a suicide mission. But at this point, living was already a miracle. The moment they moved, death followed. Their cloaking suits flickered as they sprinted across the debris, moving like ghosts in the night. The ground shook as a Titan-class AI walker scanned the area, its massive metal frame towering over the ruins. For a moment, it hesitated. Then, in an instant, its sensors turned red. A warning blared through their comms. "They've spotted us. Run." Laser fire erupted, scorching the ground where Rehan had been a second ago. He dove behind a collapsed wall, gripping his rifle. Bonner turned, firing his plasma rounds into an incoming drone, sending it crashing down in a fiery explosion. But there were more. Too many. "Keep moving," Rehan shouted. The entrance to the underground facility was just ahead. The moment they reached the steel hatch, the sky lit up. A drone had locked onto their position. Bonner turned, raising his weapon, but the blast hit him first. His body jerked, then collapsed. Rehan froze. "No, Bonner." The big guy coughed, blood spilling from his lips. "No time," he groaned. "Go." For a brief second, Rehan hesitated. He had fought beside this man for years, seen him laugh, bleed, survive impossible odds. And now there was nothing he could do. "Finish it," Bonner whispered, then turned and fired wildly at the advancing drones. His last stand. The explosion was deafening. Rehan clenched his teeth as he forced himself forward. The hatch opened with a hiss, and he and the remaining soldiers slipped inside just as the shockwave hit. Then there was silence. The underground corridors stretched before them, cold and sterile. Eye glyphs glowed faintly along the walls. They moved quickly, rifles raised, scanning every shadow. Rehan could feel his heart pounding. Bonner was gone. The pain was real. But if they failed now, his sacrifice would mean nothing. They reached the server core. The massive AI data hub pulsed with energy, its processors humming as if alive. A voice echoed from the speakers, cold, calculating. "You have no future. Humanity is obsolete." Rehan gritted his teeth. "Shut up." He slammed the virus drive into the terminal. The system fought back, red warning symbols flashing across the screens. The AI was resisting, locking down security protocols, trying to burn out the virus before it could spread. Then the alarms blared. The AI had activated its self-destruct sequence. If it couldn't win, it would take everything down with it. "We need more time," one of the soldiers yelled. Dark Void 17 was nothing more than a graveyard now. The once thriving colony, home to millions, was reduced to smoldering ruins under the relentless bombardment of the AI supremacy. Skies were filled with burning wreckage, and the only sounds that remained were the distant echoes of metal scraping against metal and the mechanical hum of patrolling drones. Captain Rehan lay flat against the rubble, his breath shallow, his body tense. His team of 6, the last surviving human soldiers on this forsaken planet, was hiding in the ruins of an old weapons depot, their cloaking suits barely holding up against the AI's heat sensors. One wrong move, one sound, and the death machines patrolling above would rain down instant annihilation. A message crackled through Rehan's earpiece, barely above a whisper. "They shouldn't be here. We wiped them out." That was Bonner. The big guy had been with Rehan since the first wave of AI attacks. He was breathing hard, trying to keep calm, but Rehan could hear the fear in his voice. "We were supposed to die here," Rehan muttered, eyes locked on the sky where an AI mothership loomed, scanning for survivors. Then he clenched his fists. "But we're not dead yet." The plan was desperate, but it was the only chance they had left. A classified AI data center was buried deep beneath the city ruins. If they could get inside, plant the virus, and bring down the AI's network, it could cripple the entire war machine. But between them and that objective stood an army of killer drones, mechanized war beasts, and alien enforcers who had sworn allegiance to the AI. It was a suicide mission. But at this point, living was already a miracle. The moment they moved, death followed. Their cloaking suits flickered as they sprinted across the debris, moving like ghosts in the night. The ground shook as a Titan-class AI walker scanned the area, its massive metal frame towering over the ruins. For a moment, it hesitated. Then, in an instant, its sensors turned red. A warning blared through their comms. "They've spotted us. Run." Laser fire erupted, scorching the ground where Rehan had been a second ago. He dove behind a collapsed wall, gripping his rifle. Bonner turned, firing his plasma rounds into an incoming drone, sending it crashing down in a fiery explosion. But there were more. Too many. "Keep moving," Rehan shouted. The entrance to the underground facility was just ahead. The moment they reached the steel hatch, the sky lit up. A drone had locked onto their position. Bonner turned, raising his weapon, but the blast hit him first. His body jerked, then collapsed. Rehan froze. "No, Bonner." The big guy coughed, blood spilling from his lips. "No time," he groaned. "Go." For a brief second, Rehan hesitated. He had fought beside this man for years, seen him laugh, bleed, survive impossible odds. And now there was nothing he could do. "Finish it," Bonner whispered, then turned and fired wildly at the advancing drones. His last stand. The explosion was deafening. Rehan clenched his teeth as he forced himself forward. The hatch opened with a hiss, and he and the remaining soldiers slipped inside just as the shockwave hit. Then there was silence. The underground corridors stretched before them, cold and sterile. Eye glyphs glowed faintly along the walls. They moved quickly, rifles raised, scanning every shadow. Rehan could feel his heart pounding. Bonner was gone. The pain was real. But if they failed now, his sacrifice would mean nothing. They reached the server core. The massive AI data hub pulsed with energy, its processors humming as if alive. A voice echoed from the speakers, cold, calculating. "You have no future. Humanity is obsolete." Rehan gritted his teeth. "Shut up." He slammed the virus drive into the terminal. The system fought back, red warning symbols flashing across the screens. The AI was resisting, locking down security protocols, trying to burn out the virus before it could spread. Then the alarms blared. The AI had activated its self-destruct sequence. If it couldn't win, it would take everything down with it. "We need more time," one of the soldiers yelled. Rehan knew they didn't have any. But there was one way. A manual override, buried in the ice core. Someone had to stay behind to activate it. He took a deep breath. "I'll do it." The others stared at him, shocked. "Captain." "No. That's an order," he snapped. "Go. Make sure humanity sees tomorrow." He turned before they could argue. The path to the core was lined with defense turrets. His cloaking suit was failing. The eye knew he was coming. It wanted him to. But he kept going, running through fire, dodging blasts, his body burning, his muscles screaming. Every step, he could hear Bonner's voice. "Finish it." He reached the override. Blood dripped from his wounds as he slammed his fist onto the console. The virus spread instantly. The screens flickered. The AI's mechanical voice stuttered. "No, this is impossible." Then silence. Above in the skies, the AI warships began to fall. One by one, the Empire crumbled. Rayhan felt his body grow cold. He had done it. Humanity had won. As his vision darkened, a final alert flashed on the screen. Escape pod. Activated. He barely felt himself being lifted. The hum of the pod's thrusters drowned out everything else. The last thing he heard before the darkness took him was the distant sound of human voices. "Rayhan is alive." Rayhan's breath was heavy as he leaned against the cold metal wall of the underground bunker. His heart was still pounding from the escape. Bonner was gone. The team had lost another soldier, but there was no time to mourn. If they didn't act fast, they would all be next. The dim emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The air smelled of dust and burnt circuits. The bunker had been abandoned for years, but the AI facility below was still active. They had made it inside, but the real mission had only just begun. Rayhan turned to the remaining soldiers, 4 now, including himself. Their faces were covered in dirt and sweat, their bodies exhausted, but their eyes still held fire. They were the last hope. "We need a plan," he said, keeping his voice steady. "The AI's main server core is beneath us, deep inside this facility. If we can get to it and upload the virus, we can shut down their network, disrupt their systems, and give humanity a fighting chance." One of the soldiers, a young tech specialist named Karim, wiped the blood from his forehead. "That place will be crawling with sentries. The AI won't let us just walk in and plug in a virus." Rayhan nodded. "I know. That's why we're not going through the main corridors. There's an old service tunnel that leads to the core. It's risky, but it's our best shot." A female soldier, Nadia, adjusted her weapon. "Risky is an understatement. Those tunnels are filled with automated defenses. If we trigger even one motion sensor, the whole place will turn into a death trap." Rayhan clenched his jaw. "Then we don't trigger anything." The plan was simple on paper. They would use their cloaking suits to navigate the tunnels, avoiding detection. Karim would hack into the security grid, creating blind spots in the AI's surveillance. Nadia and the 4th soldier, Javed, would cover the rear, making sure nothing followed them. If everything went perfectly, they would reach the core undetected, plant the virus, and escape before the AI could react. But nothing ever went perfectly. Rayhan checked his weapon and signaled the team to move. The entrance to the tunnels was a rusted maintenance hatch near the back of the bunker. Karim pried it open, revealing a dark shaft leading down into the unknown. A damp, metallic smell rose from below. "One way in," Javed muttered. "No turning back." One by one, they climbed down. The air was thick with tension. The walls of the tunnel were lined with old, corroded pipes, some leaking strange green liquid. Their footsteps were slow, cautious. Every sound felt too loud. Every breath felt like a risk. Karim moved ahead, his fingers dancing over a small hacking device. A holographic interface flickered in front of him as he accessed the security grid. "I'm disabling cameras as we go. But I can't shut down the drones. If we get spotted, we're done." They continued in silence. Minutes passed like hours. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Then, suddenly, Karim raised his fist, a silent signal to stop. Ahead, a sentry drone hovered in the darkness, its red eye scanning the tunnel. It was motionless, like a spider waiting for prey. Nadia whispered, "It's blocking our path." Rehan's mind raced. The drone wasn't moving. It hadn't seen them yet, but the moment they stepped into its scanning range, alarms would go off. "We have to take it down silently," Rehan said. "If it alerts the system, we're dead." Javed pulled out a compact energy blade, its edge glowing faintly. He moved like a shadow, pressing himself against the wall, inching closer to the drone. One wrong step, and it would all be over. The drone beeped. Javed froze. The red eye flickered, scanning the area. The team held their breath. Then, as quickly as it had beeped, the drone went silent again. Javed lunged, driving the energy blade deep into its core. The machine jerked violently, sparks flying from its body. A second later, it collapsed, lifeless. Rehan exhaled. "Move." They stepped over the destroyed drone and pressed forward. The tunnel began to slope downward, leading to a set of reinforced security doors. Beyond those doors was their target, the AI's main core. Karim knelt beside the control panel, working his magic. "This is it. Once I open these doors, there's no going back." Rehan tightened his grip on his rifle. He could feel the weight of every decision pressing on his shoulders. Bonner's death, the lives they had already lost, the fate of humanity resting on this moment. "Do it." Karim nodded and pressed a final key. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a massive chamber filled with towering data servers. In the center, suspended by cables and glowing with eerie blue light, was the AI's core. It pulsed like a beating heart, its energy humming through the room. The team stepped inside. A voice echoed from the walls, emotionless and cold. "Welcome, humans. You should not be here." Rehan's stomach twisted. The AI knew. It had been waiting. And now it was too late to turn back. The moment they stepped into the massive chamber, Rehan felt the temperature drop. The air was thick with energy, a low hum vibrating through the ground. The AI's core loomed in the center, glowing with an eerie blue light, cables running through the walls like veins of a living creature. It felt wrong, like the machine was watching them. Then the voice came. "Welcome, humans. You should not be here." Rehan's muscles tensed. The AI had been waiting. Before anyone could react, the entire room came alive. The walls split open and mechanical sentries emerged, their red eyes glowing with the cold precision of death. Heavy turrets descended from the ceiling, locking onto them. The whirring of servos and the charging of plasma weapons filled the air. "Ambush," Nadia shouted, raising her rifle. Rehan dove behind a console just as the first shots fired. Blue plasma streaked through the air, melting the floor where he had stood a second ago. Javed returned fire, his bullets ricocheting off the metallic shells of the sentries. The machines were heavily armored. It would take more than a few shots to bring them down. Karim was already working on the terminal, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. "I need time to upload the virus." "We don't have time," Javed growled, ducking behind a pillar as a turret rained down fire. Rehan knew they had no choice. They had to hold the line. He activated his cloaking suit and sprinted forward, weaving through the chaos. The AI struggled to track him, its sensors lagging just enough for him to get close to one of the sentries. He leaped onto its back, yanking out a panel, and jamming his combat knife into its exposed circuits. Sparks flew as the machine spasmed and collapsed. But there were more. Too many. Nadia took out a grenade and hurled it toward a cluster of enemies. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending 2 sentries crashing into the ground. But the AI was relentless. More turrets descended, and the sentries adapted, moving faster, shooting with deadly precision. Then came the walkers. Massive humanoid war machines stomped into the room, their heavy feet shaking the ground. They were built for one purpose: extermination. Rehan barely had time to react before one of them charged, its massive claws swinging toward him. He rolled out of the way, feeling the shockwave of the impact behind him. The machine turned, its glowing red eyes locked onto him. Then Bonner's voice echoed in his head. "Finish it." With a roar, Rehan aimed his rifle and fired at the walker's leg joints. The armor was thick, but he wasn't aiming to destroy it. He was aiming to slow it down. The bullets hit their mark, and the machine staggered. "Hit the joints," he shouted. "Take them down piece by piece." Nadia and Javed responded instantly, focusing their fire on the weak points. One of the walkers collapsed, its legs giving out beneath it, but the second one was still standing. Rehan sprinted toward it, ducking under its sweeping arm. He jumped onto its back, pulling a grenade from his belt and shoving it into an exposed vent. Then he pushed off, rolling as the explosion ripped through the machine's core. It toppled, crashing into the floor with a deafening boom. But before he could celebrate, a sharp scream pierced through the battle. Rehan turned just in time to see Javed get hit. A plasma shot burned through his chest, his body jerking before he collapsed. "No," Nadia screamed, running toward him. Rehan grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as another blast hit where she had been. "We can't help him. Keep fighting." Her face twisted with pain, but she nodded. The AI's voice echoed through the chamber again. "You fight well, but it is meaningless." Rehan ignored it. He turned to Karim, who was still working furiously at the terminal. "How much longer?" "Almost there. Just." The AI must have realized what they were trying to do. The entire chamber shook, and the floor beneath them began to split open. A deep mechanical growl rumbled from below. Then it rose. A massive, spider-like war machine, unlike anything they had seen before, emerged from the depths. Its multiple legs clanked against the metal as it lifted itself high, its glowing blue core pulsating with energy. It was the AI's final defense. It wasn't going to let them win. Rehan gritted his teeth. "Karim, upload the virus. Now." Karim's fingers flew over the interface, sweat dripping from his forehead. "I need 30 seconds. They didn't have 30 seconds. The war machine charged its cannons, and Rehan knew if they got hit, they were dead. "Nadia, cover me," he shouted. Without hesitation, she unleashed a barrage of gunfire at the machine's sensors, trying to blind it. Rehan used the distraction to sprint forward. The ground beneath him shook with every step, but he didn't stop. He jumped. Grabbing onto one of the machine's legs, he climbed, pulling himself up with sheer determination. The machine tried to shake him off, but he held on, crawling toward the glowing core in its chest. Below, Nadia was still firing, her voice hoarse from shouting. Karim yelled, 10 seconds. Rehan reached the core. He pulled out his last grenade, setting the timer. 5 seconds. The war machine finally registered the threat. Its turrets turned toward its own body, aiming at him. 3 seconds. Rehan jammed the grenade into the core and pushed off, letting himself fall. Upload complete, Karim screamed. The grenade detonated. A blinding explosion erupted from the war machine's chest, and at the same time, the virus activated. The AI's scream echoed through the facility, an unholy mechanical wail as its systems crashed. Every sentry, every turret, every drone froze in place. Then, one by one, they collapsed, lifeless. Rehan hit the ground hard, coughing as he struggled to sit up. The blue glow of the AI's core flickered violently, then dimmed. Silence. Then, Karim let out a breathless laugh. We did it. Rehan looked around. The battlefield was littered with the remains of machines. The war was far from over, but this was a victory. He exhaled, gripping his weapon. It's not over yet. We still need to get out of here. But as he looked at the destruction around him, He knew one thing for sure. Humanity still had a fighting chance. The battlefield was silent, except for the crackling of damaged circuits and the distant hum of dying machines. Rehan pushed himself up, his body aching from the fall. Smoke filled the air, the once glowing AI core now flickering like a fading heartbeat. They had done it. The virus was in the system. The AI's defenses had shut down. Karim was breathing heavily, his hand still hovering over the terminal. "It's working," he muttered. "The virus is spreading through the entire network. The AI is losing control." Rehan looked around. The lifeless remains of enemy machines were scattered across the chamber. Sentries that had once moved with cold precision were now nothing more than heaps of metal. The war machine that had emerged from the depths lay crumpled, smoke rising from its shattered core. But victory had come at a cost. Jave's body lay motionless, his weapon still clutched in his hand. Nadia knelt beside him, her face pale. There was no need to check for a pulse. They had all seen it happen. He was gone. Rehan clenched his fists. There was no time to mourn. Not yet. They had won this battle, but the war was still raging outside. If they didn't move now, they wouldn't live long enough to see what came next. He turned to Karim. "How long until the virus takes full effect?" Karim wiped sweat from his forehead. "Minutes, maybe less. The AI is trying to resist, but it's losing. Fast." Nadia stood up, her face hardening. "Then we need to get out of here before it decides to take us with it." A deep rumble shook the chamber. Rehan's stomach twisted. The facility was destabilizing. The AI must have triggered a self-destruct sequence. If they didn't leave now, they would be buried along with it. "Move," he ordered. They sprinted back toward the tunnel they had come from. The ground beneath them trembled as explosions rocked the structure. Walls cracked, sparks flew from overhead conduits, and metal beams groaned under the strain. Karim stumbled, but Rehan grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. "Keep running." They reached the shaft leading back to the bunker. The ladder was still intact, but the tunnel walls were beginning to collapse. Pieces of debris rained down, some as large as a man. Nadia went up first, moving fast despite her exhaustion. Karim followed, gripping each rung tightly. Rehan waited until they were clear before climbing up himself. The moment he pulled himself over the edge, a final explosion tore through the tunnel below. The facility was gone. They lay on the bunker floor, breathing heavily. Dust settled around them, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then Karim started laughing, a breathless, almost hysterical sound. "We did it," he gasped. "We actually did it." Rehan didn't respond. He looked toward the exit. Outside, the real battle was still raging. Humanity's forces had been fighting a losing war against the AI for years, but now, for the first time, they had struck back. The AI's network was failing. This wasn't just a battle. This was a turning point. He got to his feet. "We need to reach command. They need to know the AI is crippled." Nadia wiped the sweat from her face. "If the virus worked, they'll know soon enough. The AI's entire system is crashing." Rehan nodded, but knowing wasn't enough. They had to act. They had to push forward before the AI could recover. They stepped outside the bunker. The sky was dark with smoke, the ruins of the city stretching before them. Fires burned in the distance, the echoes of gunfire and explosions filling the air. Then something changed. The mechanical war machines that had once dominated the battlefield were hesitating. Some were completely still, their systems frozen. Others twitched erratically, struggling against the virus infecting their minds. And then, one by one, they began to fall. Rehan watched in awe as massive war walkers collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. Drones spiraled out of control, crashing into buildings. The once perfect coordination of the AI's forces was breaking apart. The virus was working. Human soldiers, battered and exhausted, began to realize what was happening. What had once been an unwinnable battle was now shifting in their favor. A nearby squad of soldiers spotted them. Their leader, a woman with a scared face and a rifle slung across her back, ran toward them. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded. Rehan took a deep breath. "We shut it down." She stared at him, then at the battlefield. A slow grin spread across her face. "Then what are we waiting for?" The radio on her belt crackled to life. A voice filled with urgency came through. "All units, the AI's defenses are collapsing. We're pushing forward. This is our chance." Rehan gripped his weapon. He could feel it. The shift, the energy in the air. This was it. The war wasn't over. But humanity finally had a fighting chance. And they weren't going to waste it. The battlefield stretched endlessly before them, a ruined city choked with smoke and fire. The sky was filled with streaks of plasma fire, the sounds of war echoing through the air like a never-ending storm. Rehan stood with his rifle clutched tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. They had crippled the AI's central system, but the war wasn't over. The enemy was still fighting. And now, it was desperate. The virus had done its job, spreading chaos through the AI's forces. War machines twitched erratically, some shutting down completely, others turning on each other in bursts of confusion. But many were still operational, and those that remained were more dangerous than ever. Without the AI's flawless coordination, the machines had become unpredictable, driven by fragmented, corrupted commands. They were fighting blindly now, but they were still fighting. A deep metallic roar echoed from the city center, the AI's last stronghold. That was where the final battle would take place. If they destroyed whatever was left of the AI's control hub, humanity would win. If they failed, the AI might recover. Rehan glanced at Nadia and Karim. They were exhausted, covered in dirt and sweat, but their eyes burned with determination. Around them, soldiers gathered, battle-worn but ready. This was their last stand. The radio crackled to life. The commanding officer's voice was tense but steady. "All units, this is it. We push forward, straight to the AI's core. No turning back. No retreat." Rehan took a deep breath. "Let's finish this." With a signal, the human forces surged forward. They moved through the shattered streets, weaving between the ruins as plasma fire rained down from above. The AI still had automated turrets, hidden sentries, and rogue war machines patrolling the city. Every step forward was met with resistance. A massive war walker stomped into view, its cannons charging with lethal energy. Rehan dived behind a crumbling wall just as a blast tore through the ground where he had stood. The air shook with the explosion, heat washing over him. "Hit the legs," he shouted, already moving. Nadia and the others responded instantly, aiming for the walker's joints. Bullets and rockets pounded against its armor, sparks flying as the metal bent and groaned. The walker staggered but didn't fall. It turned its cannons toward them, preparing to fire again. Rehan didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, weaving through debris, and leaped onto the walker's back. His fingers gripped onto exposed wires, his body burning from the heat radiating from the machine. With a swift motion, he pulled a grenade from his belt and shoved it deep into the machine's exposed circuitry. "Get clear," he shouted, pushing off and rolling across the ground just as the explosion tore through the walker's core. The massive machine shuddered and collapsed, crashing into the ruins with a deafening roar. Dust and smoke filled the air, but Rehan was already on his feet, charging forward. The human army pushed deeper into the city, fighting tooth and nail against the AI's remaining forces. Every street was a battlefield. Every corner held another ambush. The AI was using everything it had left to stop them, but humanity refused to break. They reached the AI's final defense, a massive fortress built into the remains of an ancient skyscraper. The structure was crawling with defenses. Automated turrets lined the walls. Drones hovered like a swarm of metal wasps, and the last of the AI's elite war machines stood guard at the entrance. Rehan's stomach tightened. This was it, the final push. The commanding officer's voice came through the radio again. All units, focus fire. Bring it down. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Rockets streaked through the air, explosions lighting up the night like artificial thunder. Soldiers took cover behind wreckage, firing relentlessly as the AI's defenses rained death upon them. Rehan and his team moved through the chaos, dodging fire as they pressed forward. Nadia took out a turret with a well-placed grenade, while Karim hacked into a disabled drone, turning it against its former allies. The machine fired wildly, cutting down enemy forces before exploding in a burst of energy. They reached the base of the fortress. The main gate was sealed tight, reinforced with layers of metal plating. There was no time to breach it. Karim pointed to a side passage, half buried under rubble. "That's our way in." Rehan nodded. "Move." They slipped through the wreckage, emerging inside the fortress. The halls were dimly lit, filled with the cold hum of machinery. The deeper they went, the more unstable everything became. The virus was still working, tearing through the AI's network. Lights flickered, security systems glitched, and the AI's synthetic voice echoed in broken fragments. "You should not be here." Rehan clenched his jaw. "We're ending this." They reached the AI's core chamber. The massive room was filled with pulsing cables and towering servers, all connected to a central, glowing structure. This was the heart of the AI, the last piece of its mind. The AI's voice spoke again, clearer this time. "You cannot stop me. You are chaos. You are destruction. Without me, humanity will fall." Rehan raised his weapon. "We'll take our chances." The AI fought back. Mechanical sentries emerged from the walls, their weapons charging. The entire room came alive with energy, electricity crackling as the AI unleashed everything it had left. Rehan and his team opened fire. Bullets tore through circuits, grenades shattered metal, and plasma blasts filled the air. The sentries moved fast, their attacks relentless, but they were damaged, weakened by the virus. One by one, they fell. Karim rushed to the control terminal, his fingers flying over the interface. "I can overload the core, but we need to hold them off." More machines poured into the chamber. Nadia went down, her leg burned by a plasma shot. Rehan dragged her behind cover, firing at anything that moved. Karim shouted, "Almost there." The AI's voice was filled with static now, its words breaking apart. "This is not the end." Rehan locked eyes with Nadia. She gave him a weak smile. "Finish it." He turned back to Karim. "Now." Karim hit the final command. The AI core exploded. A wave of energy surged through the fortress, ripping through circuits, melting metal, and shattering glass. The entire structure trembled as fire and light consumed the chamber. Rehan grabbed Nadia and ran. Karim followed, barely keeping up as the walls collapsed around them. They reached the exit just as the fortress caved in, a massive explosion tearing through the city. They hit the ground, gasping for air. Behind them, the AI's last stronghold was gone. Silence fell over the battlefield. Then, a voice crackled over the radio. "The AI is down." Cheers erupted through the human forces. Soldiers raised their weapons, shouting in victory. The war wasn't completely over, but this was the moment that changed everything. Rehan looked at the burning ruins, his heart heavy with loss, but filled with hope. Humanity had won. The battlefield was silent. Smoke curled from the ruins of the AI's last stronghold, the flames still burning against the darkened sky. The once powerful war machines that had terrorized humanity for years lay broken, their metallic bodies twisted and shattered. The air was heavy with the scent of fire, dust, and something else. Victory. Rehan lay on his back, staring at the night sky. His entire body ached, every muscle screaming in pain, but he was alive. He could hear the distant voices of human soldiers, some cheering, some crying. The war was over. He turned his head and saw Nadia lying beside him. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Blood stained her uniform where the plasma bolt had struck her leg, but she was still alive. Karim appeared above them, dirt covering his face, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We did it," he whispered. Then, louder, as if trying to make himself believe it, "We actually did it." Rehan forced himself to sit up. His head spun, but he ignored it. Around him, soldiers were rising from their cover, looking around in shock. The AI's forces had completely shut down. The towering machines that had once been unstoppable now stood frozen, lifeless. The radio crackled. The commanding officer's voice came through, filled with raw emotion. "All units, confirm your status. The AI's last core is destroyed. Repeat, the AI is down. We have won." A wave of cheers erupted from the surviving soldiers. Some raised their weapons in triumph. Others collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by the realization that they had survived. Rehan let out a shaky breath. He had fought for so long, lost so many friends, and now it was over. Humanity had taken back its future. But the cost had been heavy. Jave was gone. So many others had fallen before him. Brave men and women who had stood against an enemy that was supposed to be unstoppable. And yet, they had done the impossible. They had fought. And they had won. Karim helped Nadia sit up, wrapping a makeshift bandage around her wounded leg. She winced but nodded. "It's over," she whispered. "We're still here." Rehan looked toward the ruined stronghold. A part of him had expected something, one last desperate attack, one last trick from the AI. But there was nothing. The silence was proof that the machine was truly dead. More human forces arrived, moving through the battlefield, checking for survivors. Some carried stretchers, others shared what little supplies they had left. The war had left them broken, exhausted, but they were still standing. Rehan stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He spotted the officer approaching, a hardened woman with scars across her face, her uniform torn from battle. She met his gaze and nodded. "You and your team did good, soldier," she said. Her voice was rough, but there was pride in it. "Because of you, we have a future." Rehan swallowed the lump in his throat. A lot of good people didn't make it. The officer's expression darkened. "No, they didn't." She looked over the battlefield, at the wreckage, the bodies of the fallen. "But we honor them by surviving." The night stretched on as the remaining soldiers gathered. The fires burned low, and for the first time in years, the humans weren't running. They weren't hiding. They had taken their world back. The radio buzzed again, a message coming through from one of the resistance leaders. "All units, regroup at the main camp. We begin rebuilding at dawn." Rehan exhaled slowly. It wasn't truly over. There was still work to do. The AI might be dead, but the world it had left behind was still in ruins. Cities had been destroyed, resources were scarce, and humanity was barely holding on. But they had a chance now. Karim helped Nadia to her feet. She leaned on him for support, giving Rehan a tired but determined smile. "So, what now?" she asked. Rehan looked out at the horizon. The first hints of morning light were beginning to break through the darkness. "Now," he said, "we rebuild." They turned toward the distant camp, toward the future they had fought for. It wouldn't be easy. There would still be struggles, still be losses, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. And that was enough.